It wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't part of the show. It was about one song that had made Elvis a legend, but had once belonged to another voice. Hound Dog. Elvis stared at the microphone on the floor. Then he slowly looked up at Big Mama. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked like a woman who had finally reached the end of her patience. Johnny Carson stood frozen between them. The cameras kept rolling. The audience waited for Elvis to explode. After all, this was Elvis Presley, the king, the man millions of people worshipped, the man who could silence an arena simply by walking onto a stage. But that night, he was standing in front of a woman who wasn't impressed by his fame. Because Big Mama Thornton knew something most of the audience didn't. She knew that before Elvis ever turned Hound Dog into a worldwide sensation, she had already given the song its soul. And now, after years of watching her name disappear from the story, she had finally said enough. But the real question wasn't why she threw the microphone. The real question was, what happened before that moment? Because this wasn't really a story about Elvis. It was a story about being forgotten. And it began years earlier. Long before the cameras, long before Johnny Carson, and long before Elvis Presley became the king. In 1952, Big Mama Thornton wasn't a household name. She wasn't appearing on television every night. She wasn't surrounded by screaming fans. She wasn't selling out enormous arenas. But put her behind a microphone, and everything changed. Big Mama had a voice that didn't ask for permission. It demanded attention. It was deep, powerful, raw. When Big Mama sang blues, it sounded less like entertainment and more like a confession. Like someone telling the truth after years of being forced to stay quiet. Then two young songwriters, Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, came to her with a song. The song was called Hound Dog. Nobody knew what it would become. Nobody knew that millions of people would eventually scream the words. At that moment, it was simply Big Mama Thornton's song. And she made it unforgettable. She didn't sing it softly. She didn't hold anything back. She attacked every line. She filled it with attitude, with anger, with swagger, with life. And in 1953, the recording became a major hit. Suddenly, people knew Big Mama Thornton, the woman behind the voice, the woman behind the song. For a moment, history seemed fair. Her name was attached to Hound Dog. Her voice was attached to Hound Dog. Her identity was attached to Hound Dog. But then, a young man from Memphis heard it. His name was Elvis Presley. And everything changed. Elvis didn't hear Hound Dog the same way Big Mama had. He heard rock and roll. He heard speed. He heard electricity. He heard a song that could shake an audience. So Elvis transformed the performance. He gave it a new rhythm, a new energy, a new attitude. And then he stepped onto the stage and turned the song into a cultural explosion. The audience went wild. Television audiences couldn't look away. Teenagers screamed. Radio stations played it. The song became enormous, and Elvis became inseparable from it. Something strange was happening. The song that had once introduced America to Big Mama Thornton was now introducing America to Elvis Presley. People began saying, Elvis's Hound Dog. Then, Elvis's famous Hound Dog. And eventually, many people didn't even know Big Mama had recorded it first. That was when the wound began. Because Big Mama wasn't watching from the outside. She was watching from the inside. She knew every word, every note, every memory. She knew that before Elvis had ever stood beneath television lights, she had already stood behind that microphone. She had already made that song famous. And yet history was slowly rewriting itself. The song remained. Her name disappeared. Years later, Big Mama Thornton would express her frustration, saying Elvis had made enormous amounts of money from Hound Dog while she made virtually nothing. But money wasn't the entire story. Money could be counted. Money could be replaced. What she couldn't replace was recognition. Imagine creating something, watching someone else become famous for it, and then watching the world forget that you were there first. Imagine hearing people praise the song, while nobody says your name. Imagine watching history move forward, while your contribution slowly disappears behind someone else's shadow. That was the pain, and Big Mama carried it, year after year. Then came the night Johnny Carson put them in the same room. The studio lights were bright. The audience was excited. Johnny Carson was doing what Johnny Carson did best, making people laugh. Elvis was sitting comfortably. Big Mama stood nearby. Everything looked normal, until Carson brought up Hound Dog. The audience reacted immediately. Carson smiled. He turned toward Big Mama. Big Mama, what did you think when Elvis recorded your song? A simple question. At least it sounded simple. Big Mama looked at Elvis. She didn't answer immediately. 1 second passed. Then another. The smile disappeared from her face. Elvis noticed. Carson noticed. The audience noticed. And then Big Mama spoke. I thought the world would finally hear what I already knew. A few people laughed. But she didn't. Then she added. Then I realized they weren't hearing me anymore. The laughter stopped. Elvis stared at her. Carson leaned forward. Big Mama continued. You made people forget who sang it first. Elvis's expression changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. Carson tried to rescue the moment. Well now, Big Mama. But she turned toward him. No. The word was quiet. But it stopped him. She looked back at Elvis. This isn't about whether you sang the song. She paused. It isn't even about whether your version was bigger. Her voice became heavier. It is about what happened to my name. The studio became silent. Elvis finally spoke. I never said I wrote it. Big Mama nodded. I know. Then she looked directly into his eyes. But you became the face of it. Elvis leaned back. People liked my version. Big Mama didn't hesitate. And what happened to the woman who gave it a voice? The question landed hard. Johnny Carson looked down. Even he seemed to understand that there was no joke capable of fixing this. Elvis looked at Big Mama. Then asked, You think I took something from you? Big Mama's eyes didn't leave his. No. A pause. I think the world took something from me. She swallowed. And gave it all to you. The audience went completely still. For the first time that night, Elvis didn't have an answer. Because there was a difference between stealing a song and becoming the person history remembered for it. Big Mama wasn't accusing Elvis of writing Hound Dog. She was accusing the world of forgetting her. And Elvis was standing directly in front of her, wearing the face that history had chosen. Elvis slowly stood. Carson immediately became nervous. Gentlemen. Big Mama raised her hand. No. She looked at Elvis. If you're going to be remembered for that song. She pointed toward him. Then say my name. Elvis stared at her. Big Mama repeated it. Say my name. Nothing. The cameras zoomed in. The audience waited. Elvis finally said, "Big Mama Thornton." She shook her head. Again. Elvis looked at her. "Big Mama Thornton." She stepped closer. "Who sang it first?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. The silence became unbearable. Then finally, he said, "You did." Big Mama stared at him. But the answer didn't erase years of frustration. It didn't erase the money. It didn't erase the forgotten history. It didn't erase the feeling that the world had moved on without her. Then her eyes moved toward the microphone sitting on the table. Carson saw it. His face changed. "Big Mama." She reached for it. Carson stood. "Big Mama, don't." She picked up the microphone. Elvis watched. The audience began whispering. And then she threw it. Bang! The microphone slammed into the floor. The audience gasped. Carson froze. The cameras remained locked on Elvis. For a moment, the king of rock and roll didn't move. Everyone expected anger. Everyone expected an argument. Everyone expected Elvis to walk away. Instead, Elvis slowly bent down. He picked up the microphone. Then he looked at Big Mama Thornton. He began walking toward her. 1 step. 2. 3. The audience held its breath. Big Mama didn't move. Elvis stopped in front of her. He held the microphone out. She looked at it, then at him. And Elvis said quietly, "Then let's make sure they remember you." Big Mama's expression changed. Not because the past had suddenly disappeared. It hadn't. Not because everything was suddenly forgiven. It wasn't. But because, for the first time that night, the man standing in front of her wasn't trying to defeat her. He was acknowledging her. Elvis turned toward the audience. Then he said, "Before I ever sang this song, Big Mama Thornton gave it a voice." The audience was silent. Elvis continued, "And if you remember my version." He looked toward Big Mama. "Then remember hers." For a moment, Big Mama didn't say anything. She simply stood there, looking at Elvis. And the woman who had spent years feeling invisible was finally standing in the center of the story again. That night didn't change the past. It couldn't. Elvis was still Elvis. Big Mama was still Big Mama. And Hound Dog still belonged to a complicated musical history. But for one brief moment, the spotlight moved. Away from the king. And onto the woman whose voice had come first. And that was the moment Big Mama Thornton had been waiting years to hear. Not applause. Not money. Not fame. Just 4 simple words. Remember Big Mama Thornton. But the story wasn't over. Because after the cameras stopped rolling, there was still one question nobody had answered. Could one night of recognition ever repair years of being forgotten? And when Elvis walked away from that stage, he left Big Mama with something far more complicated than an apology. He left her with a choice. Forgive him, or make sure the world never forgot what happened. The studio was still silent. Big Mama Thornton was holding the microphone Elvis had just handed back to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elvis stood in front of her. Johnny Carson watched from a few feet away. The audience was waiting for someone to break the silence. But Big Mama wasn't looking at Carson. She was looking at Elvis. Because his words had reached somewhere the argument hadn't. Remember Big Mama Thornton. 4 words. Simple words. But they carried the weight of years. Big Mama slowly lowered the microphone. "You really mean that?" Elvis looked directly at her. Yes. She studied his face. Then don't just say it here. Elvis frowned. What do you mean? Big Mama stepped closer. People forget what they hear on television. She pointed toward the cameras. Tomorrow they'll talk about you again. She paused. They always do. Elvis didn't answer. Big Mama continued. But I want them to know where that song came from. Her voice became quieter. I want them to know I was there before you. Elvis nodded. You were. And I want them to know I wasn't just some name from the past. Elvis looked at her for several seconds. Then he said, You're right. That answer surprised her. Maybe it surprised Carson too. Because Big Mama had expected resistance. She had expected excuses. She had expected Elvis to defend himself. Instead, he was standing there, listening. And sometimes, the most powerful response isn't an argument. It's silence. Because Elvis was beginning to understand something. Big Mama wasn't asking him to give up his success. She wasn't asking him to erase his version. She wasn't even asking him to apologize for becoming famous. She wanted something simpler. She wanted the world to remember that she existed. That she sang the song first. That before Elvis became the face of Hound Dog, Big Mama Thornton had already given it a voice. But the story went much deeper than one television confrontation. Because long before that night, there had been another story. The story of how a song traveled from one generation to another and changed every time someone touched it. Years earlier, Big Mama had walked onto stages without knowing that the song she was about to sing would one day become one of the most recognized songs in American music. She had no idea that a young man from Memphis would eventually perform it. She had no idea that his version would become enormous. She had no idea that millions would associate it with him. At the time, she simply sang. And that's what made the story so painful. Because artists don't always know which piece of their work will survive them. Sometimes they create something beautiful, and someone else becomes famous for it. Sometimes history remembers the person who arrived later. And sometimes the original voice disappears completely. Big Mama had lived through that feeling. She knew what it was like to hear her own song coming from someone else's mouth, while the world shouted his name. And that night, sitting beneath Carson's lights, all those memories came rushing back. The audience slowly began to settle. Carson looked toward Elvis, then toward Big Mama. He knew the show had changed. This wasn't comedy anymore. It was history happening in front of the cameras. Carson leaned forward. So Big Mama. She looked at him. Do you hate Elvis? The question hung in the air. Elvis turned toward her. Big Mama didn't answer immediately. Then she shook her head. No. Carson looked surprised. No. Big Mama looked at Elvis. I don't hate him. She paused. I hate what happened. Elvis's eyes lowered. Big Mama continued. I watched the world take my song. She looked toward the audience. And then I watched them forget my name. Elvis quietly said, I never wanted that. Big Mama turned toward him. Maybe not. She stepped closer. But sometimes you don't have to want something to become part of it. Elvis looked at her. That sentence stayed with him. Because she was right. Fame could move faster than intention. A performer could step onto a stage and simply do what he loved, while history changed around him. Elvis hadn't necessarily created the injustice, but he had become the face of it. And that distinction mattered. Carson tried to move the conversation forward. So what would you have wanted Elvis to do? Big Mama answered immediately. Say my name. Elvis looked at her. She continued. That's all. Carson smiled faintly. That's simple. Big Mama nodded. That's simple. Elvis picked up the microphone again, then turned toward the audience. Big Mama Thornton. The audience applauded. She didn't smile yet. Elvis continued. She recorded this song before I did. More applause. Big Mama's expression softened. Elvis looked back at her. You should have been standing here years ago. For the first time that night. Big Mama smiled. Just slightly. But it was enough. Because sometimes recognition doesn't arrive with a fortune. Sometimes it arrives as one sentence spoken by the right person, in front of the right audience. But there was still something Elvis wanted to know. He turned back toward her. Why did you wait this long? Big Mama looked down. Then she answered. Because nobody was listening. Elvis went silent. She continued. I talked. She paused. I complained. Another pause. I watched other people tell the story. Her eyes returned to Elvis. And every time I became smaller. The room was quiet again. So I stopped talking. Elvis looked at her. Until tonight. Big Mama nodded. Until tonight. The audience applauded. But Big Mama didn't look at them. She looked at Elvis. Because she still had something to say. You know what people don't understand about singers? Elvis waited. They think the song is the important part. She shook her head. The person is. Elvis listened. A song can survive. She touched her chest. But when people forget who gave it a voice. She stopped. They forget part of the story. Elvis nodded slowly. I understand. Big Mama smiled. No. She looked directly into his eyes. Now you understand. That sentence hit harder than anything she had said before. Because Elvis had spent years being told what Hound Dog meant. Now he was finally hearing what it meant to the woman who recorded it first. Then Carson asked the question that changed the mood again. Would you ever sing it with Elvis? Big Mama looked at Elvis. Elvis looked back. The audience reacted immediately. Carson smiled. Big Mama raised an eyebrow. With him. Elvis smiled. If she'll have me. The audience laughed. This time. Big Mama laughed too. But then she became serious. You better not try to steal my part. The audience erupted. Elvis laughed. I wouldn't dare. For the first time that night. The tension broke. But something much more important had happened. The argument had become a conversation. The conversation had become recognition. And recognition was becoming something neither of them expected. Respect. Not friendship. Not forgiveness. Not the erasing of the past. Respect. Two artists standing on the same stage. Finally acknowledging that the same song could carry two different histories. One belonged to Big Mama Thornton. One belonged to Elvis Presley. And the world had room for both. But outside the studio, the story was about to become even bigger. Because television cameras could capture a moment. They couldn't rewrite history overnight. The next morning, people would still talk about Elvis. They would still remember his version of Hound Dog. They would still call him the king. But now there was another name in the conversation. Big Mama Thornton. And for the first time in years, people were asking a different question. Who sang it first? That question mattered. Because once people started asking it, they started looking backward. They discovered Big Mama's recording. They heard her voice. They heard the power in it. They heard the rawness. They heard something different from Elvis. Not better. Not worse. Different. And suddenly, people began to understand. Elvis hadn't erased the original. History had simply failed to tell the whole story. Later that night, after the cameras were turned off, the studio became quiet. The audience was gone. The lights were dimming. The crew was packing equipment. Carson had already left the stage. Elvis was standing near the exit. Big Mama was still there. He looked back at her. "You meant what you said." She looked at him. "About what?" "About wanting people to remember you." She smiled. "I've spent my whole life wanting that." Elvis nodded. Then he said, "They will." Big Mama looked at him for a long moment. "You can't promise that." Elvis smiled. "No." He paused. "But I can help." Big Mama didn't respond. Elvis walked toward the exit, then stopped. He turned around one last time. "Big Mama." She looked at him. "Yeah." Elvis smiled. "Thank you for giving the song a voice." Big Mama's eyes softened. Then she answered, "And thank you for making people listen." Elvis walked away. Big Mama remained alone on the stage. She looked at the microphone in her hand, the same microphone that had nearly ended the interview, the same microphone that had become a symbol of everything she had been holding inside. She raised it slowly, and for a moment, she didn't sing. She simply stood there, because after all those years, someone had finally said her name, Big Mama Thornton. But there was one thing neither of them knew. The story of Hound Dog wasn't finished. Because fame fades, television disappears, generations change. But songs can survive for decades. And sometimes, buried inside those songs, is the name of someone history almost forgot. The woman who gave the song its first voice. The woman who watched another man become its most famous face. The woman who finally stood across from the king and demanded one thing. Not his crown, not his fame, not his fortune, just her name. And now the world was listening. But the hardest part was still ahead. Because being remembered once isn't the same as being remembered forever. And Big Mama Thornton was about to discover just how difficult it would be to keep her place in history. The applause was gone. The cameras were off. The studio that had been filled with laughter, tension, anger, and disbelief only minutes earlier now felt strangely empty. But Big Mama Thornton was still standing there. She looked toward the chair where Elvis Presley had been sitting, then down at the microphone in her hand. For years, she had wanted the world to hear one thing. Her name. And tonight, Elvis Presley had finally said it. Not backstage. Not privately. Not where nobody could hear. He had said it beneath the lights. In front of the cameras. In front of an audience. Big Mama Thornton. The woman who had recorded Hound Dog before Elvis. For a few minutes, it felt like justice. But Big Mama knew something about justice. Sometimes it arrives too late. Sometimes applause cannot return the years that were lost. Sometimes recognition cannot repair what being forgotten has already done to a person. And sometimes hearing your name spoken by the most famous man in the room only reminds you how long the world had refused to say it. Big Mama slowly placed the microphone on the table. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Elvis had come back. He stood several feet away. His jacket was still on. His expression wasn't the expression of the superstar the audience had seen earlier. There was no smile for the cameras now. No performance. No king. Just Elvis. Big Mama looked at him. "I thought you left." "I almost did." "Why'd you come back?" Elvis glanced toward the empty chairs. Then at her. "Because I don't think we finished." Big Mama gave a tired smile. "We said plenty." "Maybe." Elvis paused. "But I didn't." Big Mama studied him. Elvis stepped closer. "I've been thinking about what you said." "What part?" "That the world took something from you and gave it to me." Big Mama's expression hardened again. "I meant it." "I know." Elvis looked down. For once, there was no immediate answer. Then he said, "When people scream your name long enough, sometimes you stop asking whose names they aren't screaming." Big Mama said nothing. Elvis continued, "I was young. I was singing. Everything happened fast. The records, television, the crowds." He looked at her. "I never stopped to think about what it looked like from where you were standing." Big Mama folded her arms. "And now?" Elvis glanced toward the microphone. "Now I do." Big Mama's eyes remained fixed on him. "Don't feel sorry for me, Elvis." "I don't." "Good." She stepped closer. "Because I don't need pity." "I know." "I needed respect." Elvis nodded. "You deserved it." Big Mama immediately corrected him. "I deserve it." Elvis looked at her. Present tense. Not deserved. Deserve. Big Mama wasn't asking to become a museum piece. She wasn't asking Elvis to praise something she had once been. She was still an artist. Still a singer. Still a woman with a voice. And she wanted to be recognized while she was still there to hear it. Elvis understood. "You're right." Big Mama smiled faintly. "You've been saying that a lot tonight." Elvis laughed quietly. "Maybe I had a lot to learn." For the first time, there was no hostility in her eyes. Only exhaustion. And something close to understanding. But then Big Mama asked him a question Elvis wasn't expecting. "Do you remember the first time you heard my version?" Elvis looked at her. He thought for a moment. "I remember hearing the song." Big Mama nodded slowly. "But do you remember me?" The question stopped him. Elvis opened his mouth. Then closed it. Big Mama smiled sadly. "That's the whole story right there." Elvis looked confused. She explained. "You remembered the song." A pause. "But not the woman." Elvis lowered his eyes. And there it was. The entire conflict reduced to one sentence. The song survived. The woman disappeared. Big Mama turned away. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." Elvis looked toward the empty studio. Then back at her. "What can I do?" Big Mama turned around. "Nothing." Elvis seemed surprised. "Nothing. You can't go backward." She shook her head. "You can't make 1956 happen differently. You can't make people unbuy your record. You can't give me your memories." She pointed toward the microphone. "But you can tell the truth when somebody asks." Elvis nodded. "What truth?" Big Mama looked straight into his eyes. "That you weren't the beginning." Silence. Elvis absorbed the words. Then slowly nodded. "I can do that." Big Mama extended her hand. "Then we're done." Elvis looked at it. Then took her hand. But Big Mama tightened her grip before he could pull away. "One more thing." Elvis raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Don't ever call it my song." Elvis looked surprised. Big Mama continued. "I didn't write it. Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller did." She paused. "I sang it. You sang it. Other people sang it." She looked toward the empty audience. "That's what music does. It moves. It changes. It becomes bigger than one person." Elvis smiled. "Even the king." Big Mama finally laughed. "Especially the king." They released hands. For the first time that night, there was no winner standing on the stage. And maybe that was the point. Because music doesn't always have winners. History creates them. History chooses one photograph, one face, one voice. Then years later, somebody looks behind that photograph and discovers the people standing outside the frame. Big Mama Thornton had spent years outside that frame. But her story had begun long before Elvis walked into it. In 1953, her recording of Hound Dog became a major rhythm and blues hit. Her voice carried the song before Elvis's version existed. Then Elvis arrived. His version became vastly more famous. It crossed audiences. It became part of the explosion of rock and roll. And his name became permanently attached to Hound Dog. But fame isn't the same thing as origin. And popularity isn't the same thing as history. The truth was more complicated. Big Mama Thornton mattered. Elvis Presley mattered. Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller mattered. And Hound Dog became what it became because music had traveled through different voices, different styles, and different worlds. That was the part people often missed. Because it was easier to tell the story with one king. It was harder to tell the story of everyone who helped build the kingdom. Elvis began walking toward the door. Big Mama watched him. Then she called out, "Elvis." He stopped, turned. She pointed at him. "You still owe me something." Elvis smiled. "I thought we were done." "We are." "Then what do I owe you?" Big Mama looked toward the microphone. "One song." Elvis laughed. "You want me to sing Hound Dog?" Big Mama shook her head. "No." She walked toward the microphone. "I want you to listen." Elvis stopped smiling. Big Mama picked it up. The studio was almost empty now. No cheering crowd. No television audience waiting for a joke. No cameras demanding a performance. Just a few crew members. Elvis and Big Mama Thornton. She lifted the microphone. Then she began to sing. Not for television. Not for the charts. Not for money. Not to defeat Elvis. She sang because the song had once lived inside her voice. Elvis didn't interrupt. He didn't join her. He didn't try to make the moment his. He simply listened. And perhaps that was the greatest respect he could offer. For once, Elvis Presley wasn't the center of Hound Dog. He was the audience. Big Mama finished. Silence followed. Then Elvis began clapping. Slowly, a crew member joined him. Then another. Big Mama lowered the microphone. Elvis smiled. That's how it should be remembered. Big Mama looked at him. No. She smiled. That's how I should be remembered. Elvis nodded. Then he left. Big Mama stood alone beneath the fading studio lights. And this time, being alone didn't mean being forgotten. Years continued to pass. Music changed. New stars appeared. New records replaced old records. But Hound Dog survived. And so did the question hidden inside its history. Who do we remember? The person who becomes the most famous, or the people who helped create the road that fame traveled on? Big Mama Thornton's life was larger than one song. She was larger than Elvis Presley, larger than one argument, larger than one television appearance. Her importance didn't depend on whether Elvis acknowledged her. But there was something powerful about imagining those two voices finally confronting the history between them. Because their stories represented two very different sides of American music. One became a global icon. The other spent years fighting to make sure her contribution wasn't reduced to a footnote. And Hound Dog stood between them. Big Mama Thornton died in 1984. Elvis Presley had died 7 years earlier, in 1977. Neither lived to see the world we have today. A world where almost any recording can be found in seconds. A world where someone can hear Elvis's Hound Dog, then immediately search for what came before. And when they do, they find her, Big Mama Thornton. They hear the voice. They hear the attitude. They hear the power. And suddenly, the story becomes bigger. Because history doesn't always erase people forever. Sometimes it simply waits for another generation to look deeper. Elvis Presley became one of the most famous entertainers who ever lived. Nothing changes that. His version of Hound Dog became legendary. Nothing changes that either. But before millions screamed when Elvis performed it, there was another voice. A blues voice. A powerful voice. Big Mama Thornton's voice. And perhaps that is where this story should end. Not with a microphone hitting the floor. Not with an argument. Not with Elvis winning. Not with Big Mama winning. But with the truth. A song can have more than one history. A legend can stand on the shoulders of people the world almost forgot. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is turn around, look behind the legend, and say their names. Big Mama Thornton, the woman who recorded Hound Dog first, the woman whose voice helped give the song its early identity, the woman who refused to disappear quietly from its history. And Elvis Presley, he made his version immortal. But he wasn't the beginning. That distinction matters. Because fame tells us who became the biggest. History tells us who was there before. And if history is going to remember the king, then it should remember the woman whose voice came first. Big Mama Thornton. This time, don't forget her.